Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We're going to give you a little bit of an update on the Florida State against ACC battle, some big news out of that case that we will break down for you all. Then we got some spring game reactions, tons of spring games this past Saturday that I want to break down for y'all. Then we'll get into some transfer portal news. See what some top teams need in the transfer portal this upcoming cycle, and then we'll finish it off with a Good Vibes Monday, and we'll talk about the UFL and the opportunity for college football players to live out their dream in the UFL. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here. Maybe you can ask something that you've been wondering for a while. You can use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have kind of an interactive experience here, and it's always fun for both of us, I think. So, but let's jump right in and let's talk about Florida State. There has been a huge battle between them and the ACC going on for quite some time now. It started when the playoff committee left Florida State out, and they saw kind of the hierarchy that was forming around college football, and they decided to take action. They sued the ACC, and the ACC sued them right back, and they are going at it over their grant of rights, and Florida State's trying to get out of the conference before the end of their media deal in 2036, so tons going on there, tons to keep track of, but one of the big things that has been going on is when Florida State filed their lawsuit against the ACC, they filed it in Florida. When the ACC filed their lawsuit back against Florida State, they filed it in North Carolina. And that has been kind of a big battle throughout this entire diatribe that we've gone through with the ACC and Florida State and now Clemson in on the party. One of the big things in both of these cases is where is it going to be tried? Where are they going to be able to hear this case, in North Carolina or in Florida? Because as we all know, home field advantage means quite a bit. And I think that's kind of the big thing that we've been kind of watching the most, at least in the short term here, when we talk about this case, and it seems like the ACC has won that. It looks like a North Carolina judge denied two motions filed by Florida State to dismiss or stay a lawsuit from the ACC, so essentially this would likely make it so North Carolina courts would be the one that hears this case, not Florida courts, which obviously is a big deal. The ACC being headquartered in North Carolina, having a lot of relationships around North Carolina can only help them, and being in Florida would only really hurt them when you have Florida State fans, when you have all of this other stuff going on in Florida. It's a big deal to have this be tried in North Carolina for them, so absolutely huge. What's at stake is obviously that $500 million plus exit fee that Florida State is trying to get out of. I believe it's somewhere around $572 million, is I believe what I read yesterday, and then 130 of that is drawn from TV revenue. So this is going to be quite the lawsuit and a lot of stuff to break down, and Florida State will be fighting tooth and nail, obviously, to not have to fork over all that cash, because it's quite an insane amount of money, especially when you're in a conference that, while not at the top of the food chain anymore by any means, is still in the conversation, right? Is still a part of all these debates in college football, and while they're running third right now, at least they're in third. At least they're in the race. So I think Florida State is in a position where, for the time being, if that's going to be the cost, they are not going anywhere. Now, the good thing for Florida State is one of the things in this contract, or in their media deal, the ACC with ESPN, is once 2027 hits, the ESPN essentially has full rights to cut that off. They have the ability to essentially exercise a 9-year option that would go through 2036. If they decide to decline that option and do away with that deal with the conference, that number becomes a lot lower for Florida State and for Clemson and for whoever else is looking to join, because as we know, there are a ton of people watching this from the sidelines, whether it's Miami or North Carolina or Virginia. All of these schools are definitely watching this very, very closely. And I think in 2027 might be the time to strike. And obviously, that's not at all what Florida State fans want to hear. They don't want to be in this conference that much longer. But at the end of the day, I think the goal of Florida State and Clemson at this point, or at least in my eyes, has got to be get as many schools involved, get as many lawsuits on the ACC's hands as possible, put them in a position where when 27 rolls around, or maybe even a little bit earlier, depending on where the ACC is at and how amenable they are, although I don't think they'll be too flexible with Florida State and Clemson throughout this process, but make it so where in 2027, ESPN's decision is very easy, and they kind of just let the ACC fall by the wayside. That number comes down significantly from the current $572 million, and you can probably move forward much easier. So I think this is a very interesting thing because Florida State and Clemson, as we've kind of gotten into these cases a little bit more detail, Florida State is fighting because they believe the ACC has not done a good job of keeping up with the college football world, especially from a media rights perspective. They signed the deal all the way back in 2016, and had it run for 20 years, up to 2036 hypothetically. So this is obviously a contract that, even when they signed it, was a little bit crazy because unless it has a remarkable amount of adjustment in the middle of that contract for the changing times and for how other conferences are getting compensated, they were always going to lose money on this deal. They were always going to be behind the eight ball when this time came, when these conferences like the SEC, the Big Ten, become more and more powerful, and the Big 12 is not lacking at all for good leadership and a good media deal. So I think the ACC kind of handcuffed themselves back in 2016, and ever since then has been kind of trying their best to create a good atmosphere for their schools, but the playoff kind of blew that up last year, and Florida State obviously was not happy with the way that they felt the ACC was on the pecking order. They didn't feel great about the media deal. They didn't feel great about just where the ACC sat in the grand scheme of things. So I think them deciding to sue the ACC makes sense. I think it created a lot of craziness around college football, but at the end of the day, Florida State is fighting about media rights. Now, Clemson is fighting kind of a different type of battle. They believe that the grant of rights, the exit fee, is far too much. I believe $130 million, like we were just talking about, is far too much for them to pay to get out of the conference. So it's kind of an interesting diatribe where you get into these two cases, and although they're filed against the same entity and they're from two schools that have the same motivation and have the same goal at the end of the day, they fight from two different angles, essentially. They're coming from two different angles at the conference, which obviously is the best way to go about things. When you're suing people, especially someone with the power that the ACC has or that any of these conferences have, the best way to do it is just put a ton on their plate, right? Put as many different cases, as many different arguments on their plate as possible, and then see where the chips fall type of thing. So I think Clemson and Florida State are kind of in an interesting position where they're fighting for the same thing, but they're not fighting the same battle necessarily. They're not fighting the same arguments. They will not be going from the same direction in these battles. And I think that bodes well for these teams getting out of the conference, but not sure how well it bodes in terms of getting more to jump in, because obviously you don't want to have someone else jump in on under the same argument of Florida State or the same argument of Clemson, because then you can group them together, and the ACC has a much better way to kind of handle this. So it'll be interesting to see what Miami might come in with, or what North Carolina might come in with, because both those schools, I'm sure, are watching this very closely. And while Miami, I talked about last week, might not be quite as inclined, I think North Carolina is the one where, if that happens, a lot of things happen very quickly, because that's the one where we've been talking about this home field battle. We've talked about home field advantage in terms of where this case is tried. The ACC would lose that immediately when North Carolina joins the party. So the ACC is kind of in this nightmare situation. Obviously, it's not where you want to be if you're the ACC, probably not where you thought you would be towards the end of last season when Florida State was making this incredible run and going undefeated and in the playoff discussion. You probably didn't think you were in danger of the entire conference falling apart, not, 6 months later from that. So obviously a lot going on around the ACC. I think they've done a really, really good job of handling all this just because of how crazy of a situation it is and how nightmare of a situation it ended up being. I don't think they ever thought that the two schools that, at least from a football perspective, are the most valuable to them are now fighting them. I don't think that's something that they expected. Now they've had to deal with it, and being able to get this on North Carolina soil for the battle is absolutely huge. So it'll be really interesting to see how all of this develops. I talked about earlier, more teams are going to get involved, and that only helps Florida State and Clemson as long as these arguments are not super similar to the other two, because that just adds to the plate of the ACC. That just adds to the confusion, adds to the uncertainty around the league, and then ESPN starts watching a little bit closely. So I think that's the ultimate goal of these two schools, is really just get as many people involved as quickly as possible, because it might just spell a quicker exit from the ACC and unfortunately, a quicker demise for the ACC. But I think from the ACC's perspective, the goal is always, in these cases, and especially in one like this, just elongate this as long as you can. To be totally honest, their media deal with ESPN has basically a addendum in it that would make it entirely void, where if the ACC is not above, or is not at 15 teams or above, ESPN agreement is entirely void, and then everything gets bad very, very quickly. So the ACC is in kind of a position where you need to kick this can as far down the road as you possibly can. You need to argue this tooth and nail, go from every single direction, get as many recesses as you possibly can, elongate this, because there are teams out there looking for a lifeline, and while the ACC, as we talked about earlier, is not necessarily the greatest lifeboat in the world, it's still one that's, above water right now, where if you're the group of 5 team, you just saw the Super League just get introduced and pitched out to everyone, and you know that in a lot of ways you would be getting squeezed out. So a lot of teams are looking for a chance to get into that party, a chance to at least have a shot to save their program and be in on the conversation, and the ACC needs them. So Clemson and Florida State, I've said time and again, I think they're gone. I don't think there was any question. I think the second that they filed these motions against the school, they were out the door. And that's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the way that college football works nowadays. But at the end of the day, there are tons of schools out there that also want out of their conference, frankly, or at least might not actively want out, but if the ACC comes calling, they will in a hurry. So I think there's tons of teams they can choose from. I think there's tons of ways they can go about it, but you have to act relatively quickly, because the Pac-12 is sitting over there with Oregon State and Washington State, and they're just kind of watching this unfold. They're hoping that the ACC falls short and they can start to poach some ACC teams, but if that doesn't happen, if the ACC is able to elongate this and add App State and Troy and JMU and some different teams and kind of build out this conference a little bit more and make it so you have no danger of falling below 15 teams. And not only that, you have more power to keep everyone else other than Clemson and Florida State in the conference. I think you then have more negotiating power, and you can go to maybe even Oregon State and Washington State and say, we already have Cal and Stanford over here, you might as well come on over. So there's two real different ways that this could go in my mind. I think the ACC thus far has been handling this very well, so I think this will be elongated for quite some time. I think this is kind of the point when everything starts to slow down. Once the case is really starting to be tried is when things really move at a molasses type pace. But at the end of the day, the ACC has a ton of really big decisions ahead of them, especially over the next couple of months, and they're going to need to act very quickly, very decisively, and if they don't, it could mean the end of the ACC. So It's a lot of moving parts here. There's going to be a lot more updates on this because Clemson is another one that they have to decide where they're going to try it. Now, this would make me think that Clemson is probably going to get the same fate that Florida State did, and this will be tried in North Carolina as well. But who knows? Maybe Clemson is fighting from a little bit better of a standing, and maybe they're able to pull it off. But obviously, a huge win for the ACC in this battle. I think it only helps them elongate this process and give them another fighting shot. Obviously, not the place they want to be, not the place they expected to be, but all things considered, with all of the things that have gone wrong for them this offseason, I think this is something that is going right, and as long as you make the right choices from here on out, it can go right for quite some time. So, huge update there. The ACC will continue to work on that and continue to kind of build out that case, and I will keep you updated as those cases kind of be tried. But for the time being, the ACC looks like they're on, somewhat stable footing as everything around them crumbles. At the very least, they have done what they can to stay upright, and then we'll see what happens from here. But we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some spring games. Clemson, NC State, and Auburn were all in action this Saturday, so I want to break down some of the big takeaways from that and some of the guys that have really jumped onto the scene for all these teams right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the ACC and a big-time case out there with Florida State. They have decided to try that case in North Carolina, so a huge win for the ACC in those battles. We will definitely keep you updated with everything happening there. But let's jump into spring games. Actually, before we jump into spring games, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to see your questions or comments on the screen. I get to react to them, and we get to have a fun back and forth here. So, but let's jump into spring games because there were 3 ones that were absolutely huge on Saturday. 3 teams that everyone is going to be watching very, very closely, and that is Clemson, Auburn, and North Carolina State. Now, let's start with Clemson because I feel like that's where a lot of the attention was on Saturday. Let's start with a little bit of bad injury luck. They had their center go down, their number 1 center, which has been a 4-year player for them, a huge piece to that offensive line, went down with what looked like an ankle injury from what I saw. Harris Sewell came in and played most of the game, did very well, but they're definitely going to want their starter back, obviously. Totally makes sense. Linthicum, I believe, is his name. I couldn't quite hear the broadcast quite clearly enough, but they're definitely going to want him back because this running game is going to be super important, especially with someone like Phil Maffa, who is a in-between-the-tackles type runner. Will definitely run down someone's throat, but you need good offensive line play to make that happen. So that's definitely something to watch. We'll keep you updated as kind of injury news comes out on him. And then the show of the day was Bryant Wesco, the guy that everyone was kind of watching, the guy that everyone wanted to talk about for the majority of the day. He had a beautiful touchdown catch over the shoulder with a really, really good throw from Trent Pierman, who had an awesome day. He is the backup quarterback there behind Cade Klubnik. He had a long touchdown run. Definitely has a little bit of athletic ability about him. Juked out a linebacker and took it about 78 yards, I think. So he's someone that if you're worried about Cade Klubnik going into the season, if you're worried he might get, even if he goes down with an injury or something, Trent Pierman looks very, very confident in that field and in this offense. So it'll be very interesting to see if his services are needed, and if they are, how well he adapts to that. But one of the things that I think everyone noticed going through this game is Dabo Swinney is absolutely going to be in media when he retires. This dude was all over the field. He was so excited to be interviewing former players and current players and coaches, and he was all over the place. So I think that is definitely what his plan will be once his time at Clemson, South Carolina is done. But he's not necessarily going anywhere anytime soon, and I don't think Clemson fans want him to go anywhere. Another big thing that happened during this game, Jamal Anderson, a linebacker, had a pick six off Christopher Vizina, where he just straight up went up and grabbed it from him. And he is actually the son of the legend that invented the Dirty Bird. So big fan of him. But I think he actually got another one, but it was called back for an offside penalty, although I didn't know if it was offsides, but that's besides the point. Another linebacker in this group that just looks remarkable. Wade Woodaz was huge for them this weekend. He was someone that looked really, really confident in his position. I didn't see a ton of Barrett Carter. Not sure how much he played. Doesn't need to play a lot, obviously, but this linebacker room as a whole looks like a Clemson linebacker room. Kobe McLeod, the brother of the Clemson legend, if you will, Ray McLeod, who's now at the Atlanta Falcons, had a really good day, made a number of really good plays. So I think this linebacker room is about as good as you could have hoped, especially with someone like Jeremiah Trotter walking out the door. You have Sammy Brown walking in the door, which is absolutely huge as a very talented young freshman. Made a couple of plays in this game, definitely looked really good, but Wade Woodaz was definitely the MVP on the defensive side of the ball for sure. He was someone that was just all over the field the entire game. But let's get to the people that everyone is worried about for this team, and I think it's the wide receivers. I think that's the group that Clemson fans, that ACC fans in general are looking at the most when they talk about the Clemson Tigers. The wide receiver is not necessarily the position that it was, even 5 years ago at Clemson, where you had guys that were NFL talents all over the field, literally littered, and it slowly kind of come to an end, and not necessarily to the degree that some people will make you believe, and especially if you watch Saturday, you do not necessarily worry about their wide receiver talent, but it's definitely not up to the standards that it was when they were on that remarkable run. But I talked about Bryant Westco. He is a huge freshman that is going to need to make plays for them, although I think they have other guys in that room that are going to be able to take a little bit of pressure off him. Adam Randall had a very, very good day. He's a very physical, big wide receiver that is someone that I think Cade Klubnik will be very, very confident throwing to, because strong hands, big body, can do a ton of really, really good things. I think he's someone that'll be huge for them. You have guys like Antonio Williams, who is a very experienced guy, never quite hit the strides that I think Clemson fans were expecting from him, but still very talented and has every ability to have a big-time year this year, especially with other guys around him that kind of take that pressure off. And then you have someone like Jake Burningstool, who I didn't see a lot on Saturday, which makes sense, but him at tight end is absolutely huge. He's someone that I think is going to be an absolutely huge addition, or not addition, but is going to be huge for this passing offense and opening up doors for these talented wide receivers to get the ball in their hands a little bit easier and get into open field and make some of the plays that they're just really equipped to make. And I think some of the big-time takeaways from this, the Orange D-line, which I believe was the number one defense, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of dominating the two-team offensive line. You're definitely going to need health at that offensive line. We talked about the center going down earlier, so health is going to be a huge thing for Clemson if the spring game is any indication of how that second-team O-line is going to hold up, because it was rough pretty much from start to finish. Now, it could be not a big deal. It could be a huge deal, depending on how much you think this Clemson D-line is going to be disruptive, because as we know, this is kind of a zero-sum game, especially on the line of scrimmage. You never really know who's playing well and who's playing bad. Is it a mix of both? It usually is, but at the end of the day, I think Clemson O-line might be a place where if Dabo's going to, compromise and go into the portal, that might be a place where he does it. Another place that he might do it is the back end of this defense. I was not super impressed with the back end of this defense. It felt like a lot of the stuff was fairly easy for the quarterbacks, a lot of quick passes, which makes it a little bit tougher, obviously. But even the ones that were a little bit downfield, it just looked like the corners weren't quite on the same level as the wide receivers. So that's another position where if Dabo really wants to have the elite team that Clemson has had in past years, I think there's some things that he's going to have to do in the portal. Now, will he do those things? If history is to be trusted, no, but I guess we'll find out. I definitely think it was an impressive showing from this team. I think Clemson fans have a lot to be excited about, but there are some holes that need to be fixed, and I think they have a great opportunity to fix them this month, and if they don't, then it could define the upcoming season. But for right now, I think if you're a Clemson fan, you have to feel really good about that performance, really good about where you sit with everything. But let's get on over to Auburn, Alabama, and talk about this one. This was a little bit different of a setup. It was offense against defense, where defense started with 27 points and the offense had 4 10-minute quarters to catch up to them. Essentially just score as many points as possible. If you, every drive, I believe, started on the 25, and they would have to make their way down. And so let's get to some of the offensive players that absolutely shined, and it's the guy we've been talking about. It's the guy that everyone has been talking about, it feels like, in Cam Coleman. He is an absolute beast. He is someone that I knew he was good. I knew he was going to be a big part of this offense. I knew a lot about this kid, no doubt about it. And then you turn on the tape and you turn on this game and he makes that incredible diving catch, or he makes that remarkable touchdown play at the end of the game, and you just say, okay, this kid's a little bit different. There are certain kids that pop out every year that just are on a different level than some other kids, than some of the players on your current roster, and that's what Cam Coleman is. He's just remarkable. He's someone that absolutely is going to jump off the page this year. He is someone that they're going to need to jump off the page if they're going to want to do the things that they're capable of doing. It's definitely going to be a weird year. 2 new coordinators on both sides of the ball, so that adds something a little bit different to the plate. DJ Durkin coming over, taking over for this defense, and they did a really good job for most of the day. Really dominated the line of scrimmage most of the time. This Auburn O-line is less than inspiring if you're a Tiger fan, but definitely still time to address that in the portal. So I wouldn't worry too much, but as of right now, it doesn't look too pretty. I'll put it that way. I think this team is in a very interesting position because they have playmakers. They have guys that are at wide receiver, at running back with Jacquez Hunter, and then you have someone like Rivaldo Fairweather at tight end. You can do a ton of different things this year. Auburn's in such a weird position where a lot of people, you look at the roster, it's not the greatest roster top to bottom. You look at the quarterback play from a year ago with Peyton Thorne, it wasn't great. Although the last time that Peyton Thorne had the weapons that he'll have this year was Michigan State, when he had a 10-win season and had the best season of his college career. So it'll be really interesting. I think this team is definitely getting better. I don't think there's any two ways about that. This whole roster just looks stronger. They look like they practice a little bit harder than past iterations of this team, and they look more confident, which is a lot of the battle in college football when you have young kids who are doing this, some for the first time. If they have elite level confidence, you can do a ton of things with him, and someone like Cam Coleman definitely has elite level confidence. But I think there's a ton to like about this team. They did have a remarkable day kicking the ball. Towns Magoo nailed all the kicks. I believe he kicked 7 kicks during this game. So the offense was not great at finishing in the red zone, but at the end of the day, got the win on that crazy play by Cam Coleman at the end. But Towns Magoo hit a 58-yarder for the offense, so absolutely huge. He's someone that is just remarkable. He is a difference maker, and when you're in the SEC and when you're playing these games against these really tough defenses, when you know you have 3 points the second you get inside the 30-yard line, it's something that not a lot of teams have and not a lot of teams can say with a lot of confidence. So I think this is a remarkable, huge thing for Auburn going into this year. I think, as we know, special teams, special players, special plays, shout out Sketch, but I think this is a huge boost to their confidence in terms of just knowing that they'll have an offense. There's not a ton of huge hype around this team in terms of making crazy runs, but at the end of the day, when you can make kicks, I mean, people underestimate just how important that is for keeping the momentum on your offensive side and keeping points going on the board. And although, you don't want to trade 7 for 3, every now and then getting a 3, getting on the board, getting that confidence rolling is huge, especially for a team like this who, as we talked about, can go any number of directions. I think they could win 9 games. I really do think that's in the cards for this team. I think Peyton Thorne could have a 2021 type season. They could shock the SEC, win games that they're not supposed to. I think they could, work out the line of scrimmage troubles and be able to at least do enough to keep these guys open. And then I think in a lot of these games, to be totally honest with you, they will have the best skill player on the field in Cam Coleman. So I think you can do a lot of different things. You could also go 6-6 or 5-7 and battle line of scrimmage troubles all season. Peyton Thorne could have another lackluster season, and you could be sitting there wondering kind of what happened at the end of it. But I do think Hugh Freeze is executing a plan. I think he's executing it incredibly well thus far. And while 2024 might not be the year that they absolutely burst onto the scene, it's coming. This Auburn team looks a lot more confident, a lot more well-built than they were even a year ago, and I'm sure that'll only continue. So while, there might be a little bit of worry around Auburn about this upcoming year, and I think there is some optimism for sure, but you're going to have to thread the needle a little bit in terms of getting all you can out of the big-time players and not falling victim to some of the things that have plagued you in the past, like penalties and offensive line play and the little things that really make a huge difference. So Auburn, kind of a mixed bag. I think a ton of things to be very, very excited about. If it's not 2024, I think 2025 is a place where I could see Auburn being a SEC contender because Hugh Freeze is fantastic at building programs, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But finally, let's get into NC State. It was a red and white game, classic type of game that we have come used to, and Kevin Concepcion is incredible. He was all over the field for the Wolfpack. He was someone that absolutely showed his ability, had an end around that he took for about 25 yards. He's someone that I think had to be the guy for the Wolfpack this past year, and it honestly didn't necessarily handcuff him, but it made him have to do things that I think he would be more dynamic in a different role. And I think that role is using him in those type of situations, kind of a gadget type guy from the slot where you can have end arounds, have jet sweeps, have different types of things with him where you just get the ball to his hands in space and let him do his thing. Another guy that showed out, CJ Bailey, the backup quarterback, showed his athletic ability. Would not be surprised at all if we saw a ton of packages with him running the ball because an athlete like that is going to be really, really tough to keep off the field. They had really, really good O-line play throughout this game. What that means, again, we don't really know, but definitely an encouraging sign for this offense and Grayson McCall in particular. Ethan McDowell is a inside reporter for NC State, and he was very impressed with the newcomers, as was I. Grayson McCall doing what he does, executing an offense to an elite degree. Noah Rogers and Justin Jolie were two guys that popped up big time in this game, and then Jordan Waters might have been the player of the game. But Noah Rogers, the guy that came over from Ohio State as a wide receiver, big-time commit. He had 7 catches, 133 yards, so he was all over the field. He is going to be an absolute difference maker and definitely the guy that would take the most pressure off Kevin Concepcion and let him be the dynamic player that he's capable of. Overall, I think this was an impressive outing from all the people that it needed to be an impressive outing from. Grayson McCall was huge. Seeing all these players, seeing Noah Rogers catch balls at the clip that he did, seeing Justin Joly play the way he did, and then Jordan Waters might have been the player of the day. I think all of that is super important to NC State. They are a team that is as dangerous as they come in the ACC. I think they could be this year's Louisville with the transfer portal class that they brought in. Jordan Waters was incredible for Duke last year. He could be better for NC State this year. The O-line play is going to be huge for that, but he's someone that is ready to take that next step forward and not only be a good running back in the ACC, but be a good running back in the country. So very excited to see what this team can put together. I was super impressed, came out with a higher opinion of the Wolfpack than I had going in. And I was already pretty excited about this team and pretty into this team going into the offseason, but they checked every box that I possibly could have wanted them to check. And the defense is definitely going to need some work. I think transfer portal is where they'll be pretty active, if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, if you wanted that offense to shine, they shined about as much as you possibly could have hoped. So tons of things to fill out, obviously, but good reviews pretty much across the board from those 3 teams. Auburn, a little bit more of a mixed bag, but tons of things to be excited about, especially Cam Coleman and that remarkable freshman wide receiver. I mean, this freshman wide receiver class is just out of this world. Maybe I'll do a segment in this next couple of days about that because it's unlike something I've really ever seen, if I'm being totally honest. So very excited about this upcoming class. I'm very excited about the upcoming spring games that are coming up these next couple of weeks. The next 2 weeks are off the walls, so we will get you updated on all of those the next, throughout this week leading up to the April 13th games, and then April 20th, another kind of big day with a ton of teams in action. So we'll break all that down when the time comes, but we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal and some of the needs for the top teams in college football, and we'll do this kind of throughout the week, so definitely will be a recurring segment, but we'll break down kind of the top teams as I see it right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the spring games that went on this past Saturday, and now it's time to talk about transfer portal. We know that I've talked about it quite a few times. This spring portal is going to be off the walls. There's going to be a ton of players that maybe you didn't expect. There's going to be a ton of turnover and roster management going on over the next couple of weeks, and let's start with kind of the big boys, what the big dogs are going to be doing during this time, because there's some significant holes in some of these teams that if they don't get fixed, they might just not be the team that you expect them to be. So let's start with Georgia, the top team in the country by a lot of people's estimation. And the problem here is going to be the problem with a lot of these teams, as you'll find, and it's the defensive tackle position. If you ask any Georgia fan what was missing from that 2023 team that was remarkably talented on offense, did a ton of really good things on the back end of that defense, they would tell you the defensive line was not a Georgia defensive line. It just wasn't up to the standard, the level that we've become so accustomed to. I mean, you had guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter coming through there, so the ability was absolutely off the charts. And there was always going to be somewhat of a step back, but excuse me. But there was quite a significant one last year, and I think it's something that Georgia's been trying to avoid. They did add Xavier McLeod from South Carolina in the portal, have Nazir Stackhouse coming back, who could have gone to the NFL draft, which is huge, but it's just not looking the way that I think Georgia fans or Kirby Smart in particular wants it to look right now. So I think that's definitely a position where they will be after guys. I think they're going to need to bring in at least one guy. I think they'll be mostly okay. I think Xavier McLeod's going to be a huge player for them. I think Nazir Stackhouse is going to be really solid, but you need difference makers if you're Georgia. And when you look up and down this roster, it's not that there's not guys that could be that difference maker, but there's not that clear-cut candidate. So it'll be interesting to see what Georgia does in the portal. It'll be interesting to see if someone comes on the market that is up to that standard that they're looking for. But at the end of the day, they absolutely need to build out the interior of that defense. And if they can fill out defensive tackle, this defense could be on the same level as some of the former defenses we've seen at Georgia. So very excited about what they can do there. Another team looking for a defensive tackle is Texas, another team that is towards the top of these rankings that we always see around. And this is a very sound roster. I'll be totally honest. I think there are a ton of NFL talent guys on this roster, not only on the first line, but in the second and the third line. There are tons of guys up and down this roster that will be playing on Sundays, but one of the areas that looks a little bit thinner than most is that defensive tackle position. Replacing Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy is nearly impossible. It's not something that you're fully going to be able to do. You are going to take a slight step back, but there are guys that can step up. Alfred Collins, Jere Bledsoe are two guys that are big-time players for them this upcoming year. They brought in, I want to pronounce this right, Tialoi Savai from Arizona. So another defensive tackle to kind of help things over there as a rotational piece, but I think they still want another one. I think they still need probably a rotational piece. It seems like Alfred Collins and someone like Vernon Broughton is kind of finding their way into those starting roles there. But at the end of the day, you need as many defensive tackles as possible, especially when you're replacing the talent that they're replacing from a year ago. So I think that's another team that will be after defensive tackles, and there's not going to be enough of them to go around, is the way I'll put it. And then let's get to Bama and a little bit of a different angle here. I think they're outside of their offense and their defense just need a little bit of work. Their wide receiver room is really interesting. I think it's a good wide receiver room. I think they have a number of guys in that room that are capable of making big-time plays for them. But when you look up and down the list, I think it's a wide receiver room full of wide receiver 2s and no wide receiver 1s. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to get one from the spring portal, but I think they'll be looking to add at least to the group that they have right now. Because although I have big-time hopes for Jalen Hale going into this new season, I'm not necessarily sure that he's going to make that step, and I don't think anyone is. So it'll be really interesting to see if there's any wide receivers that pop onto the scene that fit that bill, and I think if they do, and if they can add the right guy, I think this wide receiver group could be a lot more talented and a lot better than some people are expecting right now. But DB is probably the biggest area. It was absolutely gutted after Saban left, and they got Keon Saab from Michigan, which was absolutely huge. But they're probably going to need one or two more guys in that area just to make everything very, very comfortable and not have to worry about that too much. Obviously, you have Malachi Moore back there to be a leader, so if you bring in someone, you can put him under his wing and let him kind of lead them to the Bama way. But at the end of the day, I think they will definitely be bringing in pieces. I don't think wide receiver and DB is going to be where it stops necessarily for Alabama. I think DeBoer is still in the process of building out the roster that he wants, and this could be a big-time portal window for Bama in a number of different ways. So definitely be on the lookout for them, not only for wide receiver and DBs, but for a ton of positions. And then Florida State, another defensive tackle need here. I think Braden Fisk walking out the door is absolutely huge. He was honestly the best player on this defense down the stretch. He was absolutely dominant in the ACC championship game. Finding a replacement is going to be really, really tough. Now, they have some guys there that are very talented. They have the ability to step up, but it's the same situation that we talked about with Texas and with Georgia, where you want to be more solid and you want to be more confident going into this next year. So I think that's what they're going to be looking for. I think the edge rushing is going to be really good, but at the end of the day, edge rushing doesn't mean too much if the guy is able to step up into the pocket and escape because your defensive tackles can't get off their block. So defensive tackle is definitely going to be the place that Florida State attacks the most. Whether or not the supply meets the demand, we'll find out. Another team looking at defensive line, but I view this kind of more as a full defensive line makeover, would be Oregon. I think Jamari Caldwell was a great pickup at defensive tackle, but I think they need more additions. I think they have Damari Washington out there as well, but they're going to need guys to step up next to them and be rotational pieces, and not only, solid rotational pieces, but make big-time plays. So I think Oregon will be very active. I think the edge rushing position is more talented than the defensive tackle position, in my opinion, but there's still a lot of question marks. Mateo Uyunglele, I expect to take a big step forward. Jordan Birch, I'm a little bit more skeptical of because he hasn't taken that step forward yet. But I think this is a very talented group, but they're definitely going to need some help across that D-line. I think they could also dip their toe into the offensive line pool if the right guy comes available this spring. But one team that is absolutely going to find their way into the offensive line pool is Ohio State. They absolutely need to build out kind of the rotational pieces of that room. I think it's a solid room overall. I don't think they'll be hurting too much, but I definitely do think there is going to be some need for some rotational guys, some need for them to build it out. This might be the most complete roster overall across the country, just very few holes, but if I had to find one, then O-line would definitely be it. And then just kind of a side note about their spring practices, this QB battle is getting very, very real. I would tune in April 20th because it's going to get wild. But we will break that down in a update on spring practice here, maybe tomorrow actually. But Michigan, these last two teams, it's all about the wide receivers. And it's Michigan and it's Penn State. Two teams that I think we all expect to be in that position. Alex Orji has been doing a good job of running the offense this spring, it seems. He has kind of stepped into that starting role that some people were worried that he wouldn't be able to. Now, still tons of work to do in a spring game coming up this Saturday that will be absolutely huge for him, but you need to get him weapons because he's not going to be a prolific passer. That's just not who he is. So you need to get him weapons to where just put it in their hands and let them fly type of thing. So it'll be really interesting to see how they kind of build this out. Obviously, Michigan has a different type of wide receiver they like than other people, but I think they could use a straight up speedster, a guy that they can just run on a drag or run on a end around or whatever and just let him pick up chunk yards, because I think it would take this offense that looks a little bit stagnant at times and make it into much more dynamic, spread out these teams even more, and then Donovan Edwards can have the remarkable year that I expect him to. And then Penn State, another team that I think needs a wide receiver. Julian Fleming has done a great job so far, has done plenty of what they've asked him to do, and I think he's capable of being a number one. I just don't know how capable or how much of a number one he can be. I think Lambert Smith is someone that is very talented, did a really solid job in terms of what they needed from that wide receiver room and what they were getting. He was the guy that was providing a lot of that offense from that room, but I'm not super confident he can be the guy that they really, really need him to be. And even if he is, and even if Fleming finds his way into wide receiver one and you have the 1 and 2 taken care of, you need difference makers. All of these teams across the country, especially the ones that Penn State is going to be running into, have 3 or 4 or 5 guys that they can go to at the wide receiver position. And if you only have 2 as well as some talented tight ends, it's going to be tough. I won't lie. So I think Penn State is in a position where if a wide receiver comes on the portal, I would be surprised if Penn State did not at least make the call or did not at least show some type of interest. But that'll do it for this edition of the transfer portal needs for the top teams going into spring. I will definitely do more of these throughout the week, maybe 2 or 3 more of these, just to break down more teams and give you an idea of where everyone's heading. And then we'll do some reactions to the craziness that I think is going to unfold starting on April 15th. But for the time being, we'll take our last break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the UFL, a little Good Vibes Monday for you all. Talk about the UFL and kind of how it's giving a little bit of viability to a new opportunity for college football players to live out their dream and play pro ball. So stick with us and we will be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the biggest portal needs for the top teams in the country. We will definitely continue on that series as we go throughout the week here as a crazy transfer portal window approaches us. But let's get into a Good Vibes Monday and let's talk about the UFL. If you have been watching Fox Sports in recent weekends and you've seen teams like the Arlington Renegades and the Memphis Showboats and DC Defenders and all of these different teams that you might not be too familiar with, that is the UFL. That is a new football league that has been introduced recently, led by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who I'll talk about here in a second, and why that's kind of an important part of this whole thing. But this is a very interesting thing, and it's something that is not new. If you've been paying attention over the past couple of years, there have been plenty of leagues that have tried and failed to create a spring league in football and kind of create I don't want to say minor league, but another option to the NFL. There have been 2 USFLs, there have been 2 UFLs, there have been 1 AAF, there's been an XFL. There have been plenty of opportunities to try to create this new football league in the spring and a chance for these young players to not have to go to the NFL to live out their pro football dream. And I think this one is a little bit different for a number of reasons, but I'll get into that here in a second. The UFL, first of all, is a combination of 2 leagues that we've seen very recently, the XFL and the USFL, and it's 4 teams from the USFL, 4 teams from the XFL, and they brought them together and essentially made the best players from both those leagues into 4 rosters, down from the 8 that they both had. So it came from 16 teams down to 8 teams and combined the 2 leagues. And it's 8 teams that will play a 10-week schedule with no bye weeks, which is obviously a huge part of this, because when you don't have as many teams, bye weeks can't really be a part of the equation, because you cannot lose. You want to keep as many time slots and as many media slots as absolutely possible. So you need to have these teams playing every single week, and that's just kind of part of the deal, at least for the time being, for these types of leagues. We talked about how The Rock is kind of the figurehead of this. He is not the CEO. The CEO is someone that I believe was involved in the NFL for quite some time. With the Ravens, I can't quite remember. I apologize. But basically, they have people overseeing this that have done this before at CEO and president. But The Rock might be, weirdly, the most important person to this equation. And I think it's a very interesting thing that we've seen a lot with these different, pop-up leagues across the world of sports in general, not just football. But you need someone out front that people like, whether you are anti-Rock because, of the recent wrestling kind of, storyline that he's kind of been under. If you follow wrestling, you might be a little bit anti-Rock right now, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a lot of people that are fully anti-Dwayne Johnson. He is someone that is as beloved as really anyone on the planet. He's someone that everyone knows the face of, everyone likes, everyone puts on a very high pedestal. And although that might seem like, he's just the figurehead of this, it doesn't necessarily affect the league as a whole. It affects how many advertisers are interested in getting in. And as we know, advertiser money is the money that everyone needs and the money that everyone is after. So it'll be really interesting to see his effect on this league. I think he is someone that is super important to its success, and he's done a great job thus far of promoting it and making it as big of a deal as it has been these couple of weeks. But at the end of the day, a lot more work to do, obviously, and keeping him in the fray is going to be huge for the future of this league. But just to give you an idea of kind of where everything is sitting with this league, they're into week 2 of this league now, and the attendance numbers came out for this past week. And there's one city in particular that is setting the pace. Memphis the Memphis Showboats had about a little under 9,000 people at their game. The Michigan Panthers had about under 8,000 people at their game. The DC Defenders had about 15,000, a little bit over that. And then St. Louis had about 40,000, a little bit over 40,000, in fact. So St. Louis wants their football back. You can say that pretty confidently. They got the Rams taken from them, and the passion for football did not change by any means. But to get into kind of some of the guys that you would know that are on these rosters if you haven't been watching, Matt Corral, a legend at Ole Miss, someone that got drafted fairly high, I believe the 3rd round or 2nd round in the NFL draft by the Panthers a couple of years ago, has found his way to the UFL. He is the starting quarterback for the Birmingham Stallions, Reuben Foster, a hard-hitting dude, is in that league. Someone that if you watched him at Alabama, you were terrified of that man. Amari Rogers, a very talented wide receiver from Clemson. Chase Garbers, the starting quarterback from Cal a year ago. And A.J. McCarron, a legend at Alabama, all in the UFL right now. So it's not just guys that you don't know the names of or played at really small schools. It's guys that, are big-time players in college football and have been for quite some time. These rosters are about 58 players. So it's about 58 guys that get a chance to live out their dream, get a chance to be on the big stage, and that's absolutely huge. I think one of the big things about this is, as I talked about earlier, this has been done before. This has been tried before and failed before, but they're in a great position that a lot of the former ones were not. They have a great media deal with Fox. The production value is much higher. The play-by-play announcers are much better. Obviously, the infrastructure around it is better. You have The Rock. You have a lot of different things going in your direction. So there's some real potential here, and it's been successful in the past. Even these, not so successful leagues have been successful in getting guys to the NFL, because that's obviously the end goal. Even as cool as these leagues are, you want to get to the NFL, and Kevontae Turpin is one of the big examples, finding his way to the Cowboys after an electrifying season, and I believe the USFL. I think the USFL, if I'm not mistaken. And he's been pretty electrifying for the Cowboys. Hasn't made a ton of crazy plays, but is definitely someone that every time he gets the ball, you kind of hold your breath if you're an opposing fan. And then another kind of cool thing about this is someone like Donald De La Hoya, a guy that you might know as Destroying on the internet. He was making kind of content on TikTok and Instagram as a place kicker, just absolutely bombing kicks, hitting 60-yarders, hitting 65-yarders, doing remarkable stuff with the ball, and he got a contract. He is now on the San Antonio Brahmas, and he got a chance to live out the dream that he's been trying to live out for quite some time now, and it's just a remarkable thing. It's a crazy thing that would never happen in the NFL. So this ability for a guy to one day be going out to a high school field and kicking field goals and filming himself to preparing for, big time football games is a really cool thing to look at. But the UFL still has tons of work to do to make this a viable league. Obviously, they still have tons of growth potential that could happen. I think placing a team in St. Louis is as big of a deal as you possibly could have had. You have teams in Detroit, DC, and Houston, so some other NFL markets there, but then you have some really good cities outside of NFL markets. San Antonio is another one. Memphis is a great one. Arlington, another one. So you have some other cities there that right now don't have their NFL team, but would very much like one. But finally, before we finish out for the day, if you were looking to root for a UFL team, if you were looking for a team to kind of tie your wagon to, I broke it down in kind of a college football sense of the word. So break down all the star players on these teams, maybe some players that you particularly liked on your team or you particularly liked on another team. But let's start with the Birmingham Stallions. Matt Corral is their starting quarterback. He was the Ole Miss guy. Adrian Martinez is also getting rotation in at that quarterback position, someone that just left KSU and is definitely very, very talented, especially with his legs. So very excited to see him at the next level. Deion Kane and Amari Rogers, two receivers that came out of Clemson, have done an incredible job over the first couple of weeks. And then Jay Sternberger, a tight end from Texas A&M that was huge at Texas A&M, is now in the UFL and kind of living out his dream there. As for the Michigan Panthers, you have guys like E.J. Perry, who was from Harvard, got drafted into the NFL, and some people really, really liked him throughout that process, is now the starting quarterback for the Michigan Panthers. Danny Etling, an old LSU grad, somewhat of a legend around there in Baton Rouge, is currently their backup quarterback there. And then Marcus Sims, a wide receiver from West Virginia, is making big-time plays for them. The San Antonio Brahmas, we talked about destroying being on this team, but Chase Garbers at UCLA, the starting quarterback from a year ago. John Trey Kirkland, a guy from LSU that never quite hit his stride, but was very, very talented and has speed out the wazoo. Then you have Cody Latimer from Indiana, a very talented wide receiver when he was there. And Tease Tabor, a guy from Florida that hits really, really, really hard is the best way I can put him. He's an absolute animal on the field and definitely someone that I'm very excited to see at this level. But let's keep moving here. The Memphis Showboats have Case Cookus, someone from Michigan State who made big-time waves when he was there. Wasn't necessarily the elite quarterback that they would like, but was definitely a fan favorite for some time. Sage Surratt, a wide receiver from Wake Forest, and then Dawood Davis, a wide receiver from Western Kentucky, are kind of setting the pace out there. Arlington Renegades have a couple of guys that are very interesting. Luis Perez, Texas A&M Corpus Christi grad, someone that lit the world on fire in the D2 ranks. Lindsey Scott, another guy that kind of bounced around college football quite a bit, started at LSU, ended up at Incarnate Word, and is very, very talented, can do a ton of remarkable things. And while he's the backup on this team, is definitely capable of getting on the field and making some big-time plays. And then you have someone like Tyler Vaughns, who came from USC, was there when Sam Darnold was there and was a big-time target for him. So some big guys there. St. Louis Blackhawks is kind of the three names that I think are the most familiar out of this group, to be totally honest. A.J. McCarron coming from Bama. Obviously, everyone knows A.J. McCarron. I don't think I need to waste too much time there. Wayne Gallman, the old running back from Clemson, is just remarkable. I remember watching him thinking he was a shoo-in for the NFL. Didn't quite work out there, but has found his way to the UFL. And then you have Marcel Aitman at Oklahoma State, who was a great player for them over the past couple of years. The Houston Roughnecks is another team that's very interesting. Reed Sennett is a San Diego grad that absolutely tore people apart in college football and has found his way to the pro ranks here. Jaron Garantano, you might remember from his Tennessee run. He went to Washington State for a time. He is the backup there. And then Reuben Foster, the hard-hitting linebacker from Bama that essentially made Deshaun Watson. I don't know why I was blanking on his name. He made Deshaun Watson look like a helicopter in that playoff game. So definitely a hard hitter, someone you would definitely want to tune in to watch. You have and then for the DC Defenders, Jordan Tiamu is your starting quarterback. He went to Ole Miss, was kind of in that Shea Patterson era. And then you have Kiki Cutie, a wide receiver out of Texas Tech, and Garyon Conley, a corner out of Ohio State. Another corner on this team I found out, I think this morning actually, DeAndre Baker, a former grad of UGA that ran into some trouble early on in his NFL career, but is still very talented and got another chance to play professional football, which is always very cool. So overall, I think this is something that hopefully this is a league that can become even more viable and have even more power down the road, because I love seeing guys be able to play college football and be able to move on to the next level. Obviously, that's the end goal, right? You want to be able to be a professional football player and go through all that stuff, and you want to do it in the NFL. There's no two ways about that. Everyone wants to be an NFL player, but being able to go to the UFL, play football, keep, in the shape that you need to keep in, and then a couple of things need to happen for you to be able to jump up to the NFL. So I think this is a remarkably valuable thing. I hope it's something that sticks around for quite some time, because for me, more football is great. Seeing more college football players who, might be a little bit forgotten in the grand scheme of things, be able to find their way to a professional roster and play the sport that they love for as long as possible is something that I think you just got to do. I think it's incredible that the UFL has given all these guys this opportunity, and just can't wait to see what this league kind of grows into. Obviously, this is the first season, so it'll be interesting to see if they can make it to the second and the third and the fourth. But as of right now, it looks like they're on pretty steady footing and giving college football kids a shot to live out a dream that might be a little bit different than the one they envisioned, but still very, very cool at the end of the day. So very excited about that. Definitely will keep my eye on how that league is going and which players are getting drafted to them this time next year. But we are pretty much finished around here. That'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the updates you could possibly need. We have tons of people doing incredible work across every sport you can think of. So if you need anything, we are here for you. But thanks again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.